So this is where we stopped. You have an application, your login form is complete. You have this kind of layout, or even better. Now the question is, how do we integrate the APIs that we developed so that when you click login, the application goes to that server, checks whether the user is registered, and then if the user is registered, it navigates to the dashboard or the home screen where you have the bottom navigation bar, whatever name you're giving to that. So how do we implement that? First, these are the APIs. I'm about to log in. If I had code, the credentials here, phone number, this and this, I click on that, I'm getting code 1, which means the person is authenticated based on our logic here. If the person is exists in our database, we'll be returning 1 and that user's details. Alternatively, we will be returning a 0 and a message that these two details are invalid. How do we integrate that here? Our button here is empty, but for you, you could start with just a simple validation. If you just want to validate username and password, if username dot text dot is empty, we want to return some message here. Get dot snack bar. We have used this before. Some title and some message. I can just return the name of, okay, let me write error, and then enter username. This is what happens if the user tries to click on this without providing any credentials. We can do the same for the password. Else if I'll just copy the entire of this up to this point. So else if password is empty, we also need to tell the user that they're supposed to provide the password. Now, this part here, else, is where we are supposed to come up with some logic which goes to the server and checks whether this user is registered. First, we need to go to dev. We need to go get the dependency here. We've been doing that in class. pub.dev. We need to get this HTTP 1.2 1.2. We add it to our YAML file. We've done this before. Right here, make sure you add it under dependencies, not dev dependencies. It must align with what you already have here. After that, save. But most importantly, click on get a pub get so that that is added to your code. Once that is done, we are done with the first step. Step number 2, go to Android here, the Android folder, then the app folder, then the src folder. Inside main folder, look for Android manifest file. Be sure to add internet permission, this one here, so that your application, rather your device, allows this application to access the internet. This one, very important. And it should always be added outside the application tag, but inside manifest. So you can actually add it there, or where you have closed the application tag. This would also be correct. That's number 2. Number 3, let's now go to the login screen here. We need to now communicate with the server here within the else part. After we have done all the validation that is necessary, we now come here. Let's declare a variable called final response. This is what will store the response that comes from the server. Final response is equals to HTTP. Now, we need to import HTTP package in our code. Most of the times we have to type this, so look at what I will do. Import HTTP. If this is not suggested, the first one here, you need to go back to your YAML file and see whether this was added correctly and you downloaded it. So I'm back to my login screen. HTTP, I choose the second one. Now, sometimes we might have other packages that use HTTP. So especially and specifically for HTTP, we always use the word as HTTP. So this syntax should be as I have written it. Next, we proceed with this. Since we want to get to execute a put command, we will, a get command, we will select this. Why get and not put? Because in our API here, we say that the one for login, the API for login uses get. So that means we need to use get here. Get. Then we proceed from here. Now, get uses or requires the URL that we need to pass to it, which is really this one. So look at what I will do here. I'll go here and write URI. We need to convert that URL to URI. So we will put that address here. Look at what I will do. I'll just go get it from Postman as is. In fact, I will just hard code this as I test it first. Put it here. Of course, we need to quote this because this is a string all the way to this place. Next, we need to remember that when we are communicating to the internet or the server, just like we did when we were using shared preferences, we are making requests that we are not sure when they will be responded to, and therefore it is always important to use the keyword await here. And the moment we use keyword await here, the entire function which starts from here must be marked as async. You definitely remember that when we were dealing with shared preferences. Response. Let me correct the spelling. In fact, that simple statement has already communicated to the server. If we get that right, we've already communicated to the server. We can go ahead and print what the server brings us back. So I'll just write here response.body. Response has two parts which are important. One is the status code and the next one is the body. I'll show you that in a minute. So first, let's just execute this and see what happens. Whether it will communicate with the server and print back some message. So I'll click on the button login. It says, I hope you saw that, enter username. You remember we did some validation. So I will just write some random values here and some random values here. Remember the actual password is hard coded here for now. So now it will, you see, it's not communicating to the server, but you're getting an error. Look at this. It should say OS refused to connect. Look at that. I want you to see what I will do. Now, localhost here actually refers to the localhost, or it's actually referring to my emulator here. So I need to make some changes here, not use localhost, but use 10.0.2.2. So don't use localhost if you are testing on emulator. If you are using cPanel, just write the domain there. You cannot even use 127.0.0.1 because it means me or this device, which in this case refers to your emulator. And the server is not running on your emulator. The server is running on your computer. The other alternative you can use is to look for the IP address of your computer. You know that? CMD ipconfig and look at the IP address, this one. You can also use this one, but that will keep changing. So let's just use this and now see what happens when I click on the button. Okay. Sorry, I still have to provide the username. You can see it's actually communicating to the server and bringing back some response. This response, it's exactly as the same response we were receiving here. Now we are making good progress. Let's do away with the hard-coded values here and use the data that we are receiving from what is keyed in here. So I will replace this part with this and write username dot text, so that it uses that for as the phone number. Then where I have the value for password, I'll do the same. Password dot text. Good. Now whatever we key in here is what will be used for validation. Let me just key in some random values for now. See whether we are getting, well, let's see what was printed here. 0, invalid phone number or password. Good. Now let's use the correct one. I need to get them from here. The correct one. I think the password is 1 2 3 4 5. Let's see what happened. Did we get it right? Yes, we got it right here. Now let's proceed to process this, because we can't just use the print statement here. So what do we do with this? First, before processing what has come from the response, it is always important to check whether response, this one here, whether the status code, you remember me talking of HTTP status codes, it's always important to check whether the status code is equivalent to 200, because if it is not equivalent to 200, we cannot go ahead and process the data. So here, else, I'll just write, if it's not 200, I will throw a snack bar and say, let me just call it server error, and write error occurred while logging, this should be logging in, something like that. So this can represent any type of error from the server that does not return status code. Look at this. You remember status code? This one, 200, means we are okay, means the request was processed. We are not saying the user has logged in successfully. We are just saying the server looked at the request and responded. It could be invalid user or valid user. So right here, we can now process what has come from the server. So look at what I will do. What we need to do is this. If this code returns 1, excuse me, then we know that this user is a valid user. If we have an error or something else that is different, that code is 0, then we know this is not correct. So look at what I will do. Inside here, I'll say if, we could just process this first. I will come up with another variable here. Let me call it server data is equals to, server data is equals to JSON decode. Remember, the server sends a JSON string. And if you want to confirm that, remember what we said here, JSON encode. JSON encode. In other words, it's sending a JSON string. So the very first step we need to do here is to decode. The opposite of encode is decode. So JSON encode. What are we encoding? Response. And not just response, but the response body. So the response has two things. The status code, which we should validate and check that it's 200, but then the body. Now, everything, all the message, all of this is now stored inside the response body. All of this is now stored inside the response body here. So now let's check how do we access the code? How do we access this code? This one only, because that is what tells us that this user is registered. Is validated. They use the right username and password. So this is what we can do. Server data get the code. If this is equivalent to 1, if server code is equivalent to 1, this is a validated user. This is the correct user. So we can immediately navigate to the dashboard or wherever we wanted to go. Let's go to our roots. We have our roots defined here. Our roots. Let me collapse this, then open it. Configs, we have roots. What is the root for home? This one, home. So I'll go to the login screen. My login screen, the one I've been writing or doing the code on, and now navigate to home. If that's all we need to do, then this is all. Sometimes we might need to convert this to an integer or convert this to a string. Let me see how this goes. Did I delete this? No. Then this was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's see what happens. It's already navigating because this password is valid. Let me refresh this, start again from the login screen and enter invalid credentials here. See, it doesn't move. But just not moving and not saying anything is not good enough. So what do? Let's add an else here. Else here. Now, what do we say here? We could again use a get snackbar. Get dot snackbar wrong credentials. And this is what I would rather you do. Instead of writing here, consume this message that is coming from the server. Look at what happens when I enter wrong credential here. This message. The importance, the significance of using these as opposed to writing it in the code is when I change that message in the server. Supposing I realize it was not communicating very well, when I change it from the server, it really works well. So I just write server data, then access the message. Look at what happens now when we use wrong credentials. Let's save that first. So here, don't be tempted to write your own message here, because once you deploy the application, you cannot change that unless you send an update. It's better to use the message that is coming from the server. Okay, error, no username. So let me provide username. You can see it, invalid phone number or password. If I went to my server and added something here, please use correct ones. Really, you can use the right English there, but look at what happens here. So this is really good as opposed to hard coding this message here. Now, there's something we said. You notice when we use the correct password here, it is bringing some more data. This one. Especially the phone number. I'm assuming phone number is the primary key in my software or application. I might need to store it somewhere. And it's not just the phone number, you might need to store the other values. So I will just show you how to access them within this part. If the user logs in successfully, we can get that value and save it. So I'll just write string phone and say that this is equals to server data into Okay, look at this. Now I want you to notice there is one thing here. This string of ours has code and has user details. So now we are not interested in code. Let's access user details. So user details. But user details, it looks like is a list, and you can tell this means is a list, meaning we could have had many other users listed here, each with its own, bracket here. So we need to specify that we are interested in the 0th user, which is the only user here. So this is what I will do. Position is 0, meaning we only have one, and that is what we're interested in. But then, which of the values are we interested in inside this 0th? When you have a list of items, 1, then comma, another one. So which of these items are we interested in? Let's say phone, for example. Phone. So that's very important. That organization is very important. Now we have the phone number. Let's print it here so that we see whether we are getting the right value here. Save it. Enter it here. Password is 12345. Save. We managed to go to the dashboard, and I'm even thinking, instead of saying hi James here, which we had coded, we can now use the right name. But just for a minute, let's go to this and see whether we got the right phone number. Do you see it somewhere? Yes, here. So we accessed it in the right way. So for you, this phone number needs to be stored in shared prefs. You store it in shared preferences, and you can use it when you need to access details for this user. Good. And even the name, really, you can store the name, first name of this user, store it in shared preferences, and when you get to the dashboard here, instead of saying hi James, you can access it and display it here. I wanted to show you how to integrate our API with logging, and that's how to do it. Please remember this. As you develop your app, you can use the statement print to log or to see your output here. But at production, or as you finish up your app, you need to comment or remove all these print statements. They are very expensive when an application is running. Thank you. Let's stop at this.